Welcome, everybody, to Dare to be Catholic. I'm here again with Father BRIAN HORGAN. Welcome, Father HORGAN.
Thank you. Thank you, Marisa.
Thank you for co-hosting the show
Not at
with
all.
me.
It's a pleasure.
It is.
Thank you.
So, Father HORGAN, last week we spoke about your service in the military and what it meant to be a priest in the military and why you joined the military in the first place. Is there anything you want to add before we start this episode? Anything you...
The only thing I would really say about that is how extremely positive the experience was. I would like to think it was also positive for the troops that were there. It was a time of great opportunity for us. We could either come back kind of as the same person that left, or we could come back as changed people. And for the most part, that's what I saw, was people changed. And people came home stronger, perhaps in faith, or stronger in their own development, but definitely would have come home different in a positive sense.
Okay.
You know,
Well, that's interesting because, war is such a, it is it's such a, to me, a great tragedy when countries go to war against each other.
And it's always the innocent that suffer.
Right.
You know, when I was in Iraq, I was very much involved with Children of Iraq, a foundation that was set up by the military to help the children with school supplies, with books, educational materials. And it was very fulfilling to do that and to have a group of military guys with me to assist the innocent victims of war. Because really, I think from my own experience, there's no real winners in war.
There isn't.
You know, it doesn't. I mean, yes, it might be the last method of solving a problem, but there should be other methods tried beforehand. And I think we can be all too quick to jump into war and not touch diplomacy, not touch different methods to avoid conflict.
I agree with you. Because
I think also it's almost systematic of our society too, because it's I'm sure no news to you or to anyone that's watching or listening, that society today is very divided. There is a lot of conflict in society, largely due to the political sphere, largely due to the issues that are being discussed. But the unity that we once enjoyed, I think, as a nation, is something that each and every American must strive towards, to build a more perfect union. And they were the words of our founding fathers, and I think it's something we should strive to each and every day.
Okay, let's dive into that because first of all, I just want to say one thing. I do think in terms of the winners of the war, I think the bankers who make money off war, they're definitely winners. They win in every war, no matter what war it is. So there's that, which is very problematic, and that's a whole other issue. And then I want to also ask you, how do you think we unify, and how, because it seems to me that you're keenly positioned to help because you worked with soldiers in Iraq. Now we're spiritual soldiers now in a spiritual war. How do we navigate and how do we win the spiritual war?
Well, again, I would say it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that there is a spiritual war going on. As soon as we leave our homes, or even within our homes, there's that spiritual conflict. But that has been something that has always been occurring from the moment of Christ, because we read countless times in the Gospels of Christ, releasing people from demons or saving people that were possessed. So the notion of spiritual warfare, it's not a new notion, but it's a notion that has always existed from the beginning. And I think more than ever, it has now come into the forefront, because not only is the church kind of in the middle of a transition or development or whatever you want to call it, but also I think society has changed dramatically. You know, I think nowadays people's religion are their gyms. People no longer ask each other, what church do you go to? It's what gym do you go to?
Right.
So gym has become the new religion. And, several people have told me the reason they don't come to mass on a Sunday is because they go to the gym.
Seriously?
Yes.
Wow. So to me, that's the transition from service to self to service to others. It's like,
Well, I think almost a movement from the sacred to the secular.
mhm,
Now, hopefully it'll come back and swing back towards the things that are truly important to us. But people, I feel people don't understand fully the truth that the church possesses to guide them and to help them throughout life. If they, people always kind of will come to the church when there's a crisis and all that. But, my kind of feeling would be come to church before there's a crisis and there won't be a crisis.
okay.
So,
Mhm.
but people fail to understand that spiritual health is just as important as physical health. And I think a good sense of spiritual living, spiritual life, spiritual encountering with our God won't do us any harm, but will actually benefit us and benefit families and parents with children, because children nowadays are being fed so much nonsense from so much in society. This whole wokeism and various other things. But if they were involved in the church, if they were involved in the life of the church, if they developed spirituality in their own lives,
Mhm.
then I believe we would have very happy families.
I agree with you. So I want to touch on two things that you just mentioned because they're, to me, two different, very important issues. First of all, I agree with what you said about spiritual health. And to me, it's like maintaining your spirituality, maintaining healthy spirituality is like maintaining your healthy spiritual body in
Right.
essence, because it's like if you eat well and exercise, then you won't need to go to the doctor
Right.
as much, or you'll maintain perfect health. If you're spiritually aligned, when a crisis happens, you're already
Prepared.
So it's kind of the same thing.
It is. It is. And it's funny you say that, because just this morning I was looking at Paul's letter to the Ephesians,
Mhm.
and Paul says very clearly, he says, pray on every occasion and never, ever give up. Pray always for all God's people. And pray also that God will give you a message when he's ready to speak, so that we may speak boldly and confidently.
So I love that, because that's also reminding us to stay aligned with God and to listen, and
I think it's to keep the connection alive.
yes.
And one of the things that drives me
Mhm.
crazy is a radio that's not tuned in properly. And I'm like, turn that radio off, or shut it down. If it's not coming in clearly, I don't want to hear it.
Mhm.
And that's the same way it is with God. Unless we prepare ourselves to hear what God wants of us,
Mhm.
then how do we know what to do?
Exactly. So basically, it's very important to make sure we're spiritually tuned up,
Correctly.
right?
Yep.
And also just the same when, physically tuned up, make sure your body's tuned up, make sure your spiritual body is tuned up and connected.
And that's why Christ gave us the seven sacraments, to nourish us and to help us on our journey, and that's what they're there for. But, I think for some Catholics, they fail to realize that great gift they've been given, and think it can be done solo. But, a plane takes two wings to fly, not one.
Mhm.
And if
Mhm.
we want to fly peacefully and with tranquility in our hearts through life, then we need God as a part of it. He can't be separated from it.
I agree with you. And that's the only way, I think, we will win the spiritual war is if we're aligned with God and unify with each other and realize that we are fighting a very big uh opponent.
Yeah. Well, it is true, because the closer we are to Christ,
Mhm.
the stronger the devil tries to pull us away. And you know, it is by, I think our first thought in the morning should be Christ, should be our spiritual lives, and our last thought should be
Mhm.
our spiritual lives, because one day it will be our last thought.
Mhm.
You know, one day we will wake up for the last time,
Right.
and one day we will go to bed for the last time. And some people can maybe forget about what lies ahead of us,
Mhm.
that they may think that once we draw our dying breath, that that's the end, but it's really not. It's just the beginning. You know, how can we be comfortable in front of our Father and our Savior if we don't know him? And you know, how can we, you know, find ourselves in a position that we want to experience everlasting life, we want to experience our heavenly reward, we want to see our loved ones? How can we assume that if we don't put in the effort here? Because the best things in life are worth fighting for.
That's true. So, okay. It just makes me think about, well, life after death. What do you think happens? Where do we go?
Well, besides the official teaching on purgatory,
Right.
I think we experience an experience that we've never possibly experienced in this earth.
Mm-hmm.
We would experience a love that words can't describe. It is a fullness of love where we look at the Father looks at us, we see our loved ones, we experience such a joy and such a happiness in our soul and in our heart. Um, you know, the thing that gives me tremendous consolation is that one day I look forward to seeing my loved ones, because they were important to me on this earth, and they'll be important to me in heaven. So I do think, you know, as the church teaches, that we will stand before the throne of God, and we will be asked to give an account. But I don't think the account will necessarily be in a negative sense. I don't think we will be asked, you know, or our sins will be pointed out to us. Now, maybe they will, but I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I do also believe that the good we have done for others will be pointed out to us. That, you know, the time that you gave that homeless person money for food, that was,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that's what Christ would say. The time you uh, sat down with someone that was upset and you spent time, even though you were rushing, that was
Mm-hmm.
the time you got up in the morning and you admired the beauty of creation. That was my work. So I don't necessarily feel that God will point out the wrongs we have done,
Mm-hmm.
but I do believe he'll point out the rights we have done.
Okay.
And that's why life is so full of opportunities to do right for other people. And that's either with our time, with our effort, with our means, whatever. We have so many opportunities to do good. And that is, in essence, love. And I think a lot of our younger people nowadays uh, don't believe that they could be loved unconditionally, because society tells them love is conditional. But true love, authentic love, is unconditional. And it's the love that God has for all of us, unconditional, no strings attached, where God does not have grandchildren,
Mm-hmm.
but that God, and God has no favorites,
Mm-hmm.
except the Irish.
You know,
But,
did I ever tell you I wish I was Irish? Just on the
well,
side.
that's okay.
All right. Anyway,
But,
go ahead.
no, I think that it gives us an opportunity in
Mhm.
this life, because who knows how long our lives will be, who knows how short they could be.
True.
It gives us an opportunity to do good, because the only thing that we can take with us to heaven is the good deeds we have done for other people. That's the only thing.
Mm-hmm. That's true. So it's, it makes me sad when you say like today's youth, they think they can only be loved conditionally. Is that because the media tells them if they don't look a certain way, then nobody will like them? If they don't have a certain amount of followers on social media, nobody will like them. If it's because if they don't follow a certain wokeism, people won't like them. Is it that kind of thing you're talking
I
about?
think so. I think the media has an awful lot to answer for. Where, like on Instagram, looking at how many followers they have, or YouTube, how many followers they have. And then media promotes and, glamorizes divorce, glamorizes love, prenuptials, all this nonsense. When in fact, it never highlights the successful marriages, the successful relationships, the successful parenting that we experience. It tends to point out and glamorize the wrong. And I suppose that's what sells newspapers or subscriptions, but I think people deep down have a desire for the goodness of life. There's a bit of bad in the best of us, but there's also a bit of good in the worst of us. And I think all of us are meant to be happy. And I think true happiness can only, let me put it another way. I don't believe true happiness can be experienced without God.
So in other words, it's not going to be experienced with like Christian Louboutin shoes.
No.
I know that.
No.
But I mean,
I mean,
I'm being
No, I know,
sarcastic, but
there is a difference, Marisa, between happiness and joy.
right.
Happiness is not long lasting. We sing happy birthday for one day.
Right.
Joy, on the other hand, is one of those virtues that hits the core of our being. And that's the joy I speak of knowing God and allowing God to be part of the relationship with me. Because if I didn't have God, or if any of us didn't have God in our lives, I'd stay in bed. I wouldn't get out of bed in the mornings. Because why would I get up?
Right. Exactly. Okay. So, I mean, it's interesting to me because on one hand, as you know, I lived in New York, and that was all about fashion and what you wear, who you know, etc. But you know what? Ultimately, that is not fulfilling because it's like filling a black hole. It just never gets filled up. It's like trying to fill a black hole, but it never gets filled. It's like it always wants more, but it never feels satisfied. And to me, connecting to God is like that's where your soul gets nourished. So, I mean, I really agree with what you're saying.
Well, I think in different situations, a person kind of determines their success by their possessions,
right.
not by what they're possessed by. And I say possessed by in the best way possible.
Okay.
If they're possessed by God, they will experience joy and happiness. I have never met a person that has experienced that deep joy void of God.
I agree
It
with
just
you.
doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist.
That
So
is why Jesus said that he came to give us life and to bring it to fulfillment. So he wants us to experience that freedom in life, and he enables us to have it fulfilled with his presence.
so that's really the fulfillment.
Right.
Okay, so
We're getting very deep in the theological
I know it's already
questions.
is that too much?
No, not at
Okay.
all.
I like deep, so let's see. You wrote some really great questions last week, and I want to go back to some of them because I think they're very pertinent to what we're talking about right now. Let's see. Okay, this one was a great question that you wrote. How do you minister to soldiers who may feel disconnected from their faith or have lost faith altogether? And we talked about this earlier, or people who feel frightful, discouraged. How do you how do you minister to the people who feel spiritually lost? What do you tell them?
I think that cuts to the core identity of what it means to be a Catholic priest.
Okay,
And I tell you why, because it is a ministry of presence,
okay,
because everything is about relationships.
right.
So if you establish good relationships with people, they will establish good relationships with you. And, with people who are spiritually disconnected, having a ministry of presence with them, not, being in front of them, pulling them along, or not being behind them, pushing them, but rather walking alongside them and saying, I'm your friend and I'll help you with whatever you need. And that's what my vision of what a good priest should be. Not somebody that's there, firing off dogmas or firing off stuff. That's not what we're about. They're there for a reason, yes, to guide us and help us. But we're in a very we're in an environment where there's a lot of wounded people, and we don't need to add to that wound. We need to minister to their wounds, and we need to help them, to become, almost free of that which is holding them back. And an awful lot of that is, I find, fear of love.
Fear of love?
That people are afraid to accept the fact that God could love them completely and utterly, despite their pasts, despite what they may think, has made them so unworthy of God's love. There is nothing on earth could stop God's love for all of these creatures. The only thing that could stop God's love is the person themselves.
That's really a great truth, because the only person who could stop us from achieving anything is ourselves. The only person who could stop God's love is ourselves.
And
So,
you probably agree that we can be our own worst critics.
oh yeah.
And that is why Jesus said, when you forgive, and Peter asked him, how many times, Lord, must I forgive? 7 times. And Jesus said, Peter, no, not 7 times, 77 times 7. But I think the reference is not just made for our relationship with other people, but also with ourselves, because, people can go to confession, but they can't forgive themselves. And if God has forgiven people their sins, well, they also need to forgive themselves.
Yeah.
And maybe that could be a product of perhaps a pre-Vatican II church, where, there was a lot of fire and brimstone and hell and, all this stuff, where people now are emerging into a church that's more perhaps, community oriented, joyful, more positive in its teachings, in its relevance in the world. So I would imagine that that is part of it, but ultimately I think people seek love. And as St. Paul said, in Corinthians chapter 13, love is patient, love is kind. That's exactly what love is, but love can also be very difficult.
In what way?
Well, sometimes we hurt the people we love the most. Sometimes we can say things that we're truly sorry for. But also love can be challenging. And that is why, Paul is very, very clear when he says to the community at Corinth, strive for the higher things. In other words, don't accept love for what you experience it today, but there's a way forward to a deeper and more intimate love. If you ask any, say, cloistered monk or nun about love, they know what God's love is, because they don't have distractions.
They don't have distractions. In a way, I'm kind of jealous of that life. I have to be
I think
honest.
it's a great life for a week.
And why just for a week?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure, how I could get by without, certain things like, TV or, YouTube or things like that, So, I mean, these things are good, but it shouldn't take the focus off what's important. And what's important is experiencing God so that we may experience his truth. So that when we are faced in the darkness of our lives we will have a pathway to go.
So, okay. I mean, I can't imagine you being a cloistered monk. I'm sorry. You like people too much. You do. And they like you. So it's not gonna really, you would last
Plus,
like,
I don't think any monastery would ever accept me.
oh, why? Why?
That's a personal, that's a talk for another day, yeah, but no.
Okay. So we were talking about, the show is called Dare to be Catholic. And it seems that Catholicism, well, we've talked about this before, that it's often under attack. You know, 1 in 4 are Catholic in this country, correct? Right? You said that. And and why do you think we should be Catholic? What and why is Catholicism under attack?
Well, I think to answer your question, why should we be Catholic?
Mhm.
I think, obviously there's only one church, it's
Right.
Christ Church. And the fullness we believe is found in the Catholic Church.
Mhm.
So there's no doubt that we could ever deny the harm that was done to the church
True.
through the scandals, the
Mhm.
sexual scandals, through what occurred. But the church is not perfect. The church is made up of people like you and me,
Mhm.
and while we may think we're perfect, we're not. And the fullness in the church
Mhm.
allows us to possess the truth.
Mhm.
And again, as Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So everything boils back to Christ,
I agree
and
with you.
everything should boil back to
Mhm.
Christ. Why do I think the Catholic Church is under attack?
Mhm.
I think it's because we preach the truth.
Mhm.
We preach the values of life, the values of our tradition, the
Mhm.
values of our faith,
Mhm.
and we do it without compromising. We don't compromise the teachings of the church. We cannot.
Well, I agree. We don't compromise and we cannot. I guess the thing is, to me, there is this grassroots Catholicism going on right now, which is what we're pretty much talking about. And then there's the church, which some people, well, there are a lot of issues to me with the church, but anyway, what I'm more interested in is what we're talking about right now. And it does go back to Jesus. It goes back to Christ, because the opponent, that's who they're terrified of. And that's, I think, a large part of why we're under attack.
Well, I think the devil takes great delight in seeing the disunity amongst the church.
Yes.
And he must be a very happy man.
How do we make him miserable?
Well, I'd be miserable enough if I was in hell too.
Okay.
But I think, the way forward, as I see it,
Mhm.
is firstly, people should never be ashamed to be Catholic. We have the richest tradition and the richest teachings that have shaped the world.
Mhm.
Because Christ, if you look at the remarkable man that he was,
Mhm.
he chose 12 simple men, fishermen, and yet his presence has changed the world completely. So I think, knowing that his mission and his message of salvation to all through him has not changed over the centuries. But I do believe that kind of our pathway has to be, firstly, to stand up for Catholic values. Secondly, to identify as Catholics. One of the things I found very interesting, I was reading an article actually in the Catholic Herald about the election recently in England, and the amount of MPs that took their oath of allegiance on the Bible was down over 48% on the election previous.
Interesting.
That they did not want to put their hand on the Bible, they just wanted to affirm.
Why is that, do you
Well, I
think?
think it's a reflection of society, isn't it?
Mhm. Mhm.
So, one of the things that when standing up and identifying as Catholic And it's one of the things that we make available here at St. Lucy for free.
Mhm.
If anyone wants a catechism, which is the official teaching of the church, or a Catholic Bible, we'll give it to them for free. All
I-
they need to do is send you an email and
Okay.
we'll send it out to them, no problem. Or they can come by the office
I
and pick
got
it
it.
up at any time, yes.
Mhm.
But firstly, not being ashamed. Secondly, standing up and identifying as Catholic.
Mhm.
And then thirdly, doing our best to live that Catholic faith. Like, one thing I often say to married couples or couples I've witnessed their marriage is, if I was to go to your house, now when they hear me say that, they like freeze. They're like, is he going to drop by our house?
Yeah.
But I asked them, would I know it's a Catholic house? Would I know it's a Catholic house? Upstairs in my room, upstairs, I have my great grandparents' statues that were in their house, a simple farmhouse. And, so these things are important to us, I mean, my cross and my miraculous medal, that's so very important to me. It's so important that even when I die, I've asked my brother to wear it. So, small things like that, recognizing Sunday as a special day.
Mhm.
Sunday is a day for the community. It's a day for the church. Sometimes people can think that, it's all about them. So they may not go to mass. But what they fail to see
Mhm.
is that it's also about the community. The community has a right to have you there
Right.
because you belong to them.
Mhm.
And your absence, you're depriving them of your presence. So, I think doing the best we can to live out our Catholic faith and values. There's only 7 laws of the Catholic Church, the precepts of the church, and it's not too difficult.
So what are the 7 laws?
I knew you were going to ask me,
Because I was afraid you were going to ask
but
me.
no,
and
I
know you.
wouldn't dare ask you because I know you know, and you know I know.
Mhm.
But it's just a kind of standing up
Mhm.
for the truth and standing up for the life and standing up for the way. And all of them point back to Christ.
See, and that's again why I think this show is so important, and that's why we're doing this. For me, it's because courage is infectious, and you are very courageous, and you are outspoken, and you're fearless about speaking the truth. So thank you again. And I think, in an age where everybody is so discouraged, and what is the root of the word courage? Quare, Latin for
Right.
heart, right? So it's about having the heart, your heart connection to God, to
Absolutely.
Jesus, to Mary, right?
Absolutely. And that's why I would like maybe in our next podcast
Yes.
to maybe talk about, the spiritual kind of concepts of warfare and,
Okay.
how best we can counteract that.
Okay.
Because in the letter of Timothy, he says, be calm but vigilant, because your enemy, the devil, is prowling round like a roaring lion, looking for someone to eat. Stand up to him, strong in faith.
Can we really that?
That's
it
a
gonna
very
be-
important passage.
Okay, let's definitely devote our next show to that.
Super.
All right. Well, thank you, Father Horgan.
Thank you.
And is there anything else you want to say before?
No, I just look forward to, daring people to be Catholic and encouraging people to be Catholic and always knowing that I'm here for anyone, Catholic or not. But, I think it's a wonderful opportunity for a different generation now to take the reins and to bring us forward. And that's hopefully what we will see.
Thank you. All right, everybody, that's another episode of Dare to Be Catholic. Thank you all for watching.
Perfect.